Prince Obinna of Umoji sat in the grand palace, staring out over the kingdom that will one day be his to rule. The weight of his crown to be bore heavily on his mind. Though his father Ezeagu was still the reigning king, Obinna had always known that his path was set from birth, that one day he would marry and inherit the throne. What he had not anticipated was how much his heart would conflict with his royal duties. In Umoji, Obinna was a beloved figure, admired for his charm, intelligence, and generosity. The young women of the kingdom and surrounding villages yearned for his attention, hoping to catch his eye and secure a future as queen. Yet, this attention was the very source of Obinna's discontent. He heard whispers among the courtiers and noble families of women who wanted to be queen and the wealth that came with it. But where, he wondered, where is the place of love, true love, untainted by position or greed? It was on this particular evening, as the sun set over the palace walls, that Obinna called upon Ikenna, his most trusted guard and childhood friend. Ikenna was a man of few words, but possessed a heart as loyal as steel. When he entered the chamber of the prince, Prince Obinna motioned for him to sit. "Ikenna, my friend," the prince began, his voice filled with frustration. "How can a man like me find true love when the world sees only my crown and wealth?" Ikenna remained silent for a moment, weighing his response. He knew his prince well, and he had seen the growing sadness in Obinna's eyes over the past few months. Finally he spoke. "Your Highness, if it is true love you seek, you must leave behind the crown that hides your heart. Love cannot see through gold or jewelries." Obinna raised an eyebrow. "Leave behind the crown?" Ikenna nodded. "Travel far from here to a place where no one knows your name. Become a simple man. Only then will you see if love finds you for the man you are, not the prince you were born to be." The idea struck Obinna like a lightning bolt. So simple yet profound. He could escape the trappings of royalty, even if only for a short time, and experience life as an ordinary man. His heart quickened with hope, the first he had felt in months. "Ikenna," Obinna said with determination, "we will leave at dawn. Just you and I. We will go far from Umoji, where no one knows me, and I will live as a pauper. We will not return until I have found someone who loves me for who I am, not for the throne I will one day inherit." Ikenna smiled, a rare sight. "As you wish, Your Highness. We will find the woman you seek." That night, Obinna packed a few simple belongings, a change of clothes, a small dagger for protection, and a modest sum of money. He wrote a letter to his father explaining his decision to leave the palace for a while, but assuring him that he would return when the time was right. By morning, before the kingdom awoke, Prince Obinna and Ikenna set out on horseback, heading eastwards through the dense forests that bordered Umoji. They traveled swiftly, leaving behind the life of luxury and royal privileges. They passed through the neighboring villages of Unobi and Ojoto, careful to avoid drawing attention. As the days turned into weeks, they ventured further and further from the heart of the kingdom, until they finally reached a place where the name Prince Obinna was nothing more than a whisper carried by the wind. The village of Nkwere lay nestled among hills and fertile farmlands, a place untouched by the grandeur of kingdoms. It was here that Obinna and Ikenna chose to settle, taking on new identities as farmhands in search of work. The once prince, now dressed in rags, his fine features hidden beneath the dirt and grime of long travel. No longer Obinna the prince, he introduced himself as Chibuike, a farm boy who had lost his family and was now seeking a means of livelihood. Ikenna, who had always been content in his role as a protector, became Ifeanyi, a fellow traveler with a quiet strength. The villagers of Nkwere welcomed them with the hospitality of those who had little but were willing to share. They found shelter with an elderly widow named Mama Chinyere, who offered them a small room in exchange for their help on her farm. This land has been heard on me since my husband passed," she said, her voice trembling with age but full of warmth. "But with strong men like you to help, perhaps the harvest will be kinder this year." Obinna, now Chibuike, nodded humbly. "We are grateful for your kindness, Mama. We will work hard to earn our keep." And so the prince and his guard began their lives as ordinary farm hands. Each day they rose with the sun, toiling in the fields, planting yams and tending goats. Though the work was physically demanding, Obinna found a certain peace in the simplicity of the life he had found. But amidst the sweat and toil of his new existence, one thought remained ever present in his mind. Would he find the love he sought, or would his quest prove fruitless? One quiet day in the fields, Obinna noticed a young girl, Adako, the daughter of a poor fisherman. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her beauty was undeniable, with her dark, radiant skin and eyes that sparkled like the stars over Nkwere's nightfall. But it was not her beauty that captivated Obinna. It was the way she carried herself with grace, humility, and kindness. Adaku spent her days selling fish at the market and weaving baskets, helping her parents make ends meet. One afternoon, as Obinna and Ikenna were carrying bundles of firewood through the village, they passed by Adaku's modest home. She was sitting outside, weaving a basket, her face glowing in the soft afternoon light. Obinna paused, unable to take his eyes off her. Ikenna, noticing the prince's distraction, smirked. "Your Highness, I believe you have found someone of interest." Obinna shot him a look. "I'm no prince, Ikenna, and yes, I have. But how does a pauper win the heart of such a woman?" "Good afternoon, Adako," Obinna greeted, his voice gentle yet firm. "I've seen you around the village, always working so hard. Your hands must be tired from all that weaving." Adaku laughed softly, her voice as melodic as the breeze that swept through the village. "The work keeps me busy. And what of you, Chibuike? I see you and Ifeanyi always carrying bundles of firewood or working in the fields. Mama Chinyere must be grateful to have such strong young men to help her." Obinna felt a warmth in his chest at the sound of his name on her lips, even though it was not his true name. He smiled. "Mama Chinyere has been kind to us. We are happy to help her." For the first time since leaving the palace, he felt that he had found something, or rather someone, worth pursuing. But how could he win her without revealing his true identity? He would have to proceed carefully, ensuring that she saw him not as a future king, but as the humble man he now appeared to be. And so the prince, who had become a pauper, began his courtship of the woman who had unknowingly stolen his heart. Over the following weeks, Obinna, still disguised as Chibuike, found himself seeking more opportunities to be near Adaku. Their conversations grew louder, and each day they spent together seemed to pull them closer, whether it was a chance meeting or at the village well, or brief exchange at the market. Obinna felt a deepening connection with her. He found ways to help her without being too obvious. Whenever she was struggling to carry her basket to the market, Obinna would appear, offering his strong arms to lighten her load. Adaku, for her part, seemed to appreciate his presence, often smiling warmly as he approached. One day, after spending hours tending to the farm, Obinna approached Adaku's small hut with a bundle of firewood. He had no particular reason to be there, but he couldn't resist seeing her again. Adaku was outside washing some clothes. She glanced up as he approached and wiped her hand on her wrapper. "Chibuike, you're just in time," she said, gesturing to a nearby pot on the fire. "I was about to make ofe ora soup. Would you like to join me for lunch?" Obinna's heart leaped. He hadn't expected the invitation, but he was glad it came. "I will be honored." The two spent the next hour in Adaku's humble kitchen, talking as she stirred the bubbling pot of soup. The smell of freshly cut vegetables and the fragrant leaves of ora filled the small room. As she cooked, Adaku shared stories about her childhood, her dreams of traveling beyond the borders of Nkwere, and the close bond she had with her parents. You never know, Obinna carefully said. Perhaps one day you'll see those places. You have a strong heart, Adaku. I believe you could do anything you set your mind to. Obinna thought he saw something flicker in Adaku's gaze, an unspoken understanding. But before he could say anything, Adaku turned her attention back to the soup. Let's eat, she said, her voice lighter. The soup is ready. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing the simple meal of pounded yam and ora soup. As Obinna's feelings for Adaku deepened, so did the complexity of their relationship. The villagers of Inkwere had begun to take notice of how often they were seen together, how the once distant Chibuike now lingered in Adaku's company at every opportunity. Whispers began to spread that perhaps a romance was blossoming between the two. Mama Chinyere, always wise to the goings-on in the village, raised an eyebrow when she heard the gossip. One evening, as Obinna returned from yet another visit to Adaku's home, she cornered him to question him about Adaku. He just smiled and hugged her. Weeks passed, and then one day, as they walked in the farm, his thoughts were interrupted by Ikenna, who approached him with a grim expression. There's news from Umoji, Your Highness. Obinna's heart skipped a beat. What is it? Your father, Ezeagu, has sent messengers across the land searching for you. Word is spreading quickly. It won't be long before someone in Inkwere recognizes you. Obinna cursed under his breath. He had known this day would come, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. The urgency of the situation hit him like a storm. If the people of Inkwere discovered who he truly was, the fragile life he had built would collapse. And worse, Adaku would feel betrayed. We must leave now, Ikenna said, his voice calm but firm. You cannot stay here much longer without risking everything. Obinna's mind raced. Leaving now meant abandoning Adaku without explanation. But staying risked exposure. He couldn't imagine walking away from the woman he had come to love. Yet he knew that the truth would soon catch up with him, whether he was ready or not. I can't leave her, Obinna whispered. Not yet. Adaku greeted him with the usual smile, but Obinna could see a hint of concern in her eyes. Chibuike, is everything all right? You seem troubled. Obinna took a deep breath, steadying himself for the words he was about to speak. Adaku, he begins, his voice trembling slightly. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Adaku frowned, her eyes wide open in confusion. What is it? Obinna hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened his mouth to speak, but before the words could escape, the sound of approaching horses thundered in the distance. His blood ran cold. Messengers from Umoji had arrived. They drew nearer, shattering the stillness of the village. Obinna's heart sank as he realized that the time he had feared was now upon him. The messengers from Umoji had come, and with them the truth he had so carefully concealed would be laid bare for all to see. Adaku turned towards the sound, her expression puzzled. What's going on? Who are they? Obinna's throat tightened. He knew there was no more time for gentle revelations or carefully chosen words. The truth will soon be revealed to Adaku, not by his hand, but by the very men sent to drag him back to his former life. Adaku, he said softly, stepping closer to her. There's something I must tell you before they arrive. I am not who you think I am. Her eyes widened in confusion. What do you mean? Before Obinna could answer, the messengers appeared, riding into the village square on horseback, their royal banners fluttering in the wind. The villagers gathered, murmuring amongst themselves as the men dismounted and called for attention. People of Inkwere, the lead messenger shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. We come on behalf of Ezeagu of Umoji, seeking his son Prince Obinna. Shock rippled through the crowd, and Adaku's gaze snapped to Obinna, her face filled with shock and disbelief. Prince Obinna, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Obinna closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself for the confrontation. he had been dreading. Yes, Adaku, he said softly. I am Prince Obinna of Umoji. I came here in disguise, hoping to find love without the weight of my title. I never meant to deceive you, but the hurt in Adaku's eyes pierced his heart. She took a step backwards, shaking her head. Oh, you lied to me, she said, her voice trembling. All this time, you were lying? I didn't mean to, Obinna pleaded, stepping forward. I wanted to tell you, but I needed to know that you love me for who I am, not for my title or wealth. Please, Adaku, you have to understand. But Adaku's expression hardened, her eyes filling with anger and betrayal. Understand? She repeated, her voice rising. You came into my life pretending to be someone you're not? How can I trust anything you've said? How can I trust you? Obinna reached out to her, but she took another step backwards, her hand trembling. Adaku, please. Before he could say more, the messenger stepped forward, their eyes fixed on him. Your Highness, the lead messenger said, bowing deeply, we have come to bring you back to Umoji. Your father, the king, awaits your return. Obinna's heart sank as he realized that the choice had been made for him. He can no longer stay in Inquiry, no longer pretend to be Chibuike. His life as Prince Obinna had come crashing back, and with it, the love he had found was now on the verge of shattering. I will go, Obinna said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. He turned back to Adaku, his eyes filled with regret. But please, Adaku, before I leave, know this. Everything I've felt for you is real. My love for you is real. Adaku stood frozen, her face pale with shock and disbelief. She said nothing, her silence speaking louder than any words. The messengers led Obinna away, his heart breaking with every step he took. He glanced back at Adaku one last time, hoping to find some sign of forgiveness, some flicker of hope, but she remained still, her expression unreadable. As Obinna mounted his horse, Ikenna stood by his side, his face solemn. I warned you, Your Highness, he said softly. Obinna nodded, his chest tight with grief. I know, Ikenna, I know. And so the prince, who had once sought love as a pauper, was now returning to his kingdom, but his heart remained in Inquiry with the woman who may never forgive him. Upon arriving at the gates of Umoji, the people gathered to celebrate the return of their beloved prince. Obinna bowed respectfully before the king, but his response was muted. Thank you, Father. Ezeagu, sensing his son's sadness, placed a hand on his shoulders. What troubles you, my son? You should be rejoicing. The throne is waiting for you, and soon you will be king. But Obinna could not take his heart off Adaku. The look of betrayal on her face, her silence as he left. He had returned to his kingdom, but he felt hollow, meaningless, without the love he had sought and lost. I need time, Father, Obinna said quietly. There is something I must make right before I can embrace my future as king. Ezeagu raised an eyebrow, surprised by his son's words, but he nodded. Take the time you need, my son. But remember, the kingdom will always need its prince. That night, as the palace feasted and celebrated his return, Obinna slipped away to his chambers. He could not bear the thought of leading a kingdom while his heart was still shattered. Ikenna joined him later, bringing news from Nkwere. Adaku has not spoken to anyone about your departure, Ikenna said, his voice low. But the villagers know who you are now. They speak of the prince who left them to return to his kingdom. Obinna sat in silence, staring out the window. The stars above seemed cold and distant, much like his feelings of helplessness. I cannot forget her, Ikenna, Obinna murmured. I have to see her one last time, to explain everything, to beg for her forgiveness. Ikenna's eyes softened. Then, go for her, Your Highness. You owe her that much. The next day, Obinna, now riding without the royal entourage, made his way back to Nkwere, his heart raised as he approached the village, unsure of how Adaku will receive him. He had left her in the wake of a painful revelation, and now he hoped to heal what he had broken. When he arrived in Inquiry, the villagers regarded him with a mixture of shock and uncertainty. They bowed in respect, but there was an awkwardness in their demeanor. They had come to know him as Chibuike, the humble farm boy, not as Prince Obinna. He found Adaku by the river, where they had often spoken during the early days of their courtship. She was sitting on a stone, staring out over the water, lost in thought. Her beauty was as radiant as ever, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Adaku, Obinna called softly as he approached. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they stood in silence, the distance between them filled with unspoken words. I did not come here to ask for your forgiveness, Obinna said, his voice filled with emotion. But I do owe you the truth. Everything I did, pretending to be someone else, was because I wanted to find true love. I wanted to know if someone loved me, it would be for me, not for the crown or the kingdom. Adaku's eyes flickered with pain. And so you lied to me? You pretended to be something you're not? And now you expect me to just understand? Obinna stepped closer, his voice trembling. I never meant to hurt you, Adaku. I fell in love with you as Chubike, the farm boy, not as Prince Obinna. My love for you is real. I know I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid that if you knew who I was, everything between us would change. Adaku's lips tightened, her voice bitter. And it has changed. I trusted you, Chibuike, or Obinna, or whoever you are. You made me believe that we were the same, that we shared the same struggles, but you were never like me. You were always above me. Obinna's heart ached at her words. He had feared this exact reaction, yet hearing it from her lips was more painful than he could have imagined. I don't want to be above you, Adaku, he said softly. I want to be beside you. I love you with everything I am. Prince or pauper, it doesn't matter. Adaku stared at him for a long moment, her expression conflicted. Obinna could see the battle playing out in her heart, the hurt mingling with the love they had once shared. Finally, she sighed, her voice softer. You say you love me, but love requires trust, Obinna. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. Obinna's shoulders sagged with the weight of her words. He had expected this, but hearing it was still devastating. I understand, he whispered. I will not ask you to forgive me now, but I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes until you can trust me again. And if that day comes, or it never comes, then I will have to live with that. Adaku looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I need time, Obinna. Obinna nodded, his heart breaking all over again. Take all the time you need. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Adaku by the river. As he made his way back through the village, the weight of what he had lost settled heavily upon him. He had come to Nkwere seeking true love, and he had found it, only to lose it because of his own deception. But as he left, Obinna knew that his journey was not over. He would return to Umoji and fulfill his duties as prince, but his heart would always belong to Adaku. Whether she would ever forgive him or not, only time will tell. Months passed. One day, as Obinna sat in the royal garden contemplating the future, a familiar figure appeared at the palace gates. His heart raced as he recognized her. Adaku! She stood tall, her expression calm but resolute. The months had softened the hurt in her eyes, though traces of it still lingered. Obinna rose from his seat, his pulse quickening as he approached. I thought you were never coming back, Obinna said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Adaku's gaze was steady as he spoke. I need time to think. You hurt me, Obinna, but I've come to realize that I love you for who you are and who you were, not for your title. The truth is, I don't care if you are a prince or a pauper. What matters is whether we can rebuild the trust that was broken. Obinna's heart swelled with emotion. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust," he vowed. "I never wanted to hurt you, Adaku. All I ever wanted was to love you." Adaku smiled, a small but genuine smile that brought warmth to Obinna's chest. "Then, let's take it step by step." Obinna nodded, relief and joy flooding his heart. One step at a time. Prince Obinna had sought true love as a pauper, and in Adaku, he found it. But more importantly, he had learned that love, once lost, could be found again. And so, Obinna and Adaku got married in the palace with a lot of celebration, and she became his queen.